Okay. Do we have to turn off the music there, John? All right, we're back. I'm back. If we have to, maybe we just remind some people very quickly because I need to start. But yeah, as you guys can see, the presentation today, our first large group of all our large groups is this: the Christian response to racism in America. And so I'm going to cover a lot of different topics today. I'm going to cover kind of a brief history of kind of how we got here. And so there's a lot of stuff. And so just take some notes as you go. We'll write down some questions as we go, and I'll do my best to get to them with the last 10, 15 minutes, okay? And so welcome, guys. Welcome to Esther and Kristen. I think it's Teacher Angela, I'm thinking. And Matthew, good to see you guys. And everybody else who's there. Let me pray for us, and then we're going to jump right in, okay? Because there's a lot, and I'm going to do my best to not just make it like really boring. I'm going to try to bring some life into it, okay? But it's a tough topic. And so, yeah, let's pray, and let's get into this, okay? Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much, Lord, for this time to come together for this first large group of the summer. And there's going to be many more to come where other teachers are going to come up here, and they're going to share and teach on a topic that is close to their heart. Lord, you know, this topic right here, I've spent a lot of hours, a lot of thoughts, a lot of thinking, a lot of prayer going into this topic. And so I just pray, God, for your children. This is kind of the topic of the day right now, where we're trying to figure out how to navigate this and how to feel about it. And I really pray more than anything, our prayer has to be, as Christians, it has to be the question, really, God, what is it that you believe, or what is it that you see, God? What is your truth? What does your word say, God? And I want to believe whatever you say in this time. And so, God, help us, Lord, to do that. Would you be with your children? I know this might be a little heavy, might be a little too much for some of them, but just help us all to arrive somewhere at the end where you want us to be. We thank you so much. We love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, welcome, everybody. And as more come in, I just hope you guys are blessed. I hope you guys are challenged. I hope you guys learn. I'm sure you're going to learn something. Like, there's no way you wouldn't. There's no way you know everything here, okay? Because I didn't know everything here. But let's just do our best, guys, to have an open heart, open mind, and want to come out of this time trying to have a Christian response. That's why I titled this, The Christian Response, okay? And so what I want to do is I want to set the stage, and I want us to be reminded, especially if you haven't learned yet, be reminded or learn for the first time, what our history of slavery is in America, okay? And so I go all the way back to 1619, when we brought over the first 20 African slaves here to America. And actually what was going on at the time was slavery had already been going on for a long time, okay, guys? Like, slavery, by and large, had just always been going on for centuries at this point, okay? But what was going on was Portugal, their slave trade was booming, and they were bringing over massive amounts of people. Somehow we as Americans, we intercepted one of their ships, and we took 20 of their slaves, okay? And so those were the first 20 slaves that were brought over. And so from that time, this is a long time jump here, but up until 1808, 388,000 African slaves are brought to America, out of a total of about 10.7 million that were brought over to places like the Brazil, Caribbean, and America, okay? And so something I do want to say, because you might hear it a certain way in the media, like, America, we have like the greatest sins when it comes to slavery. I'm not at all justifying slavery. Like, it's a terrible, terrible, evil thing. But just know that when it comes to how many people we took from Africa compared to Brazil, which is the number one offender, and compared to the Caribbean, like, our numbers are tiny in comparison, okay? And so that's just something to know, all right? Between 1774 and 1804, all northern states abolished slavery, okay? That's something to remember. Like, that's a long time ago, all right? And it doesn't mean that racism stopped existing in the North. It just meant legally you couldn't own slaves in the North from 1774 to 1804. That's a really long time, okay? And I think right now, like, the media's narrative about our history of slavery is like, well, we pretty much kept slaves like almost up until the civil rights movement. Like, that's kind of the way it's talked about. That's totally false and not true. The northern states, the Union, they had already abolished slavery, even going into all these things that are going to come next, okay? So 1820, there's the Missouri Compromise, which was a compromise where certain states, they wanted to make sure that slavery was abolished, but in order to come together, there had to be a compromise, and Missouri was allowed to be a slave state, okay? And that's significant in our history. Another significant point is that around 4,000 lynchings took place between 1877 and 1950, and so that is a very long period of time as well. And any amount of people being lynched is is a terrible amount of people to be lynched, even one person being lynched, okay? And when I say lynched, we're talking about many of them were hung, or hanged, rather. Some were just like straight up shot. Some were beaten to death. Some were dragged behind wagons and vehicles and things like that, okay? And so around 4,000 black people were lynched in that time period. By 1860, the domestic slave trade had about 4 million slaves. And so what does that mean? Well, we only brought over about 380,000 from Africa. And so how did we get to 4 million? Well, it's pretty obvious. The slaves reproduced, like they had children. And so the black community grew so much that it was about 4 million people enslaved by 1860, okay? From the 1830s to the 1860s, the movement to abolish slavery in America gained strength. And it was led by people like Frederick Douglass that you guys probably learned about in school. Okay? I just explained that. Hopefully you caught that. In January 1st, 1863, that's when Lincoln put forward the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay? That was for the abolishment of slavery all across the United States. There's some debate that people want to say, like, oh, Lincoln didn't really want to abolish slavery. Like, there's a couple quotes that I've read, and people take that out of context. So Lincoln, by and large, wanted to get rid of slavery. There's a couple statements that he made that makes sense in the context of trying to restore the Union and preserving peace in the Union, okay? And so if you see anything like that Lincoln was a racist and he was for slavery, that's completely false. Like, actually open up a history book, and you're not going to find that narrative. You're not going to find that story. And so if you're hearing that right now, just know you can do the job. Go ahead and open up your history book, go to your history website, and you read about it. Lincoln was wanting to abolish slavery, and he did, okay? At least on the national level. I would say things didn't really start to take effect, though, from the Emancipation Proclamation until about 1865, when the 13th Amendment was ratified, okay? And so that was the official abolishment, I think is the word, of slavery, okay? All right, moving forward. So what I want to do now, so that was kind of our brief history of slavery in the country. Now I want to give us a brief history of segregation, okay? All right, so during the Reconstruction period, that was the time from 1865 forward for roughly a decade or two, I believe. That's called the Reconstruction period. And what was going on during that period was the Union came down to the southern states to help them reconstruct their way of life down there when it comes to, well, what do we do with the slaves, and how do we move forward with our economy and things like that, okay? And so that was the Reconstruction period. During that period, black people, by and large, started to have new freedoms. They were able to do things they never could before, okay? They could get a job. They could, start to, as far as property and land, I've heard different things about that, but they were able to start their families and have jobs and things like that, okay? So it wasn't that even after the abolishment of slavery, black people were just still enslaved. And I've kind of heard that narrative too, like it was just nothing changed. No, there were discernible changes. It didn't mean that they had a great life from that point forward, but things were considerably different, okay? In 1865, though, the first black codes are enacted, and vagrancy laws, which for the most part negatively and disproportionately affected black people. What those were what happened as soon as the black people were freed. What happened was a lot of black people, they're like, okay, now what? Like, we're free, but now what do? I don't know any skills. I don't know how to do XYZ job. And so what was going on in the community was a lot of black people weren't working. And so because that was an issue, and people in certain cities and governments, they wanted to do something about this. What can we do about the non-working black population? What they did is they put forward these laws. And so if you didn't have a job and a commitment to have a job by the next year, you would get fined. You could be imprisoned. And so was it a very unfair thing? Yes. But does it make some sense? I would say yes. Also, it did make some sense that you can't just have a whole population of people not doing anything and not working. And a lot of things happen when people aren't working, okay? And so I will say that. It was a terrible thing. It didn't help the black community. It hurt them overall. but that's just kind of the full picture of what was going on at that time. From the 1870s to the 1900s, there really wasn't, you can go back and you can try to find it, there really wasn't a popular opinion about wanting to segregate from black people and wanting to see the disenfranchisement of black people. And what that means is that there really wasn't, like, in the public, like, a big kind of popular opinion. We hate black people, we're racist against black people, we want black people to kind of, suffer and this and that. It wasn't really like that. Now, what you did have is, like, some people's opinions, like what they thought of black people, like they're subhuman and those kinds of opinions. But when it came to, like, the popular public opinion, there really wasn't, we don't want anything to do with the black people. We want to be separate from them. There really wasn't that, okay? So for those years, those decades right there, that's pretty significant. By 1878, some accounts from abolitionists, so these are the people who were working very hard to free the slaves and were actually sometimes even very radical, like kind of going too far with it, right? So some of these abolitionists could be very radical. They went down to the South to see what the conditions were for black people. And what they found, by at least one account, a very famous abolitionist, his account was, I went down to the South basically expecting to see that the black people were living in very, very terrible conditions or were being oppressed by the white people. And what he found, actually, there was already at that time some kind of integration going on. White people were not overall mistreating black people at that time, okay? And that's significant too, like 1878, okay? You would expect, I think black people didn't start to get treated better until, like, after the Civil Rights Movement. And I think we hear this, but no, even at this time, there was integration going on and there was a different mindset and treatment of black people already in the country at that time. From 1887 to 1891, this is when the Jim Crow laws were adopted, okay? You probably heard a lot about Jim Crow laws. They were overall a detriment, a very bad thing for the black community. But again, these laws, there is something to try to understand about why those laws came about. It wasn't just simply we hate black people, or we want to be racist against black people. And so therefore we're going to enact these laws. The Jim Crow laws had to do with, at least from what I've researched, it had to do with people, so the white community not being able to have the jobs that they needed during a time of economic recession, okay? And so what that means, everybody was struggling. The white people, yes, it's a racist response, but in their fight or flight kind of mentality, in their struggle, their mentality was, well, the black people are taking some of the jobs that we could have today, and so let's enact some of these laws so that it prevents the black people from having those jobs, okay? And so that's part of the Jim Crow laws. There's more to it. And so that's the beginning of legalized racial segregation, okay? So up until that point, around 1891, all right, there wasn't really segregation going on in the country in a really discernible way, okay? And that's important to know because a lot of people they're gonna try to say no. From the very beginning, there was always segregation. It's just not true, okay? All right. A couple other things about segregation. Until 1900, black income per capita more than doubled. What that means is, well, from slave times, black people really weren't bringing in an income, right? What this shows, they started to have a life. They started to be able to make money for their family during this time, and it was actually, their income was going up pretty rapidly up until 1900, okay? And that's something to know, and I have this picture here. I was going to show a video, but what this video shows, you can actually type it into YouTube later if you want to watch it. I think it's 1920s Oklahoma. Just put black people, okay? Black people, 1920s Oklahoma. What that video is about 50 different cities in Oklahoma were run by black people. Well, towns, okay? 50 different towns were completely run by black people. So you had black people as the owners of stores and banks. You had black people as the oil kind of tycoons, okay? So that's what was going on in 1920, even during a time of Jim Crow laws. And I share that just to say, yeah, Jim Crow laws were terrible, and they were a bad thing for the black community overall, okay? But it didn't mean that it was impossible to make it in the country. There were pockets of black people who were able to thrive during this time, okay? And some part of that history, it does kind of go downhill for that particular community eventually. But I just share this just to say, we have to try to get the full picture here. We can't just say, okay, Jim Crow laws, or we can't just go slavery and hop over to segregation, Jim Crow laws, and hop over to civil rights movement. We have to try to understand the things that come in between, okay? In 1948, Truman ends segregation in the armed forces, okay? In 1954, this is a very famous one, Brown versus Board of Education in Topeka. And that was a case where the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional to segregate children in schools, okay? So to have segregated schools was unconstitutional. There is more to that story. I just don't have the time to kind of get into that one. But that was kind of a landmark case for the fight against segregation, okay? And I do want to be clear, segregation is a bad thing, all right? In case anyone's wondering, like, is he saying segregation's okay, or is it bad, is it good? It is, it's terrible, it's bad, okay? It's a bad thing when you have legalized segregation, like just by law, you can't do something, you can't go somewhere, certain people can only go to this or that, okay? By law, segregation is a terrible thing. In 1955, things start to really pick up when it comes to the civil rights movement. And something that really sets off the civil rights movement, they had already kind of started by this point, but what kind of propels it forward is in 1955, Emmett Till was brutally murdered. You can call it lynched. He was lynched for allegedly flirting with a white woman. He was murdered by two men who just beat him to death. Okay, and there is no more to that story. It is exactly just what that is. Okay, so he was murdered for allegedly flirting with a white woman. And then in the same year, actually two different women. I didn't put the other young lady. She's a teenager, but she was pregnant, and so she didn't get to become kind of the face of the movement, where Rosa Parks did a little bit later in the year. So Rosa Parks, she's the woman. Hopefully you guys know the story. She refused to give up her seat on the bus, and black people were supposed to sit at the back of the bus. She didn't want to give up her seat. Another interesting thing to know, I came across, actually about 75% of the people riding on those buses were black, and so it really was ridiculous to have that kind of segregation going on in the bus, where 75% of the people are black, and then you're being asked to move when like almost everybody on this bus is black. Okay, so Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat. She kind of becomes the face of the early civil rights movement. That also prompted a year-long bus boycott, and so I want to bring that up because sometimes, too, you're going to hear people say, well, it's only really been black people fighting in the civil rights movement, kind of fighting for themselves and fighting for their own rights, and that's simply not true. Like throughout even like slavery times, abolitionists, many were white people. It had to be because the white people had the power to do something to change the situation, okay? And then here in the civil rights movement also, you have a lot of white people partnering with the black community to fight against this stuff, okay, to fight against segregation. In 1957, you have 60 black pastors and Martin Luther King Jr. They meet to coordinate some nonviolent protests, all right? And I wasn't trying to stress the nonviolent protests. This is literally, I just stole that verbatim, okay? In 1957, also, Eisenhower enacts one of the civil rights acts to protect black voters' rights. And so at the time, black voters, they did not have equal rights when it came to voting. I'm not sure what their rights were at that point, but this helped them to be able to vote on a more equal field. It didn't change completely, though, because Martin Luther King Jr. continued to fight for that throughout his whole movement, okay? 1963 was the March on Washington. That's the really famous I Have a Dream speech, okay? And so that's where that was, and that's when that happened. And so this is a good 8 years into the I'd call it the climax of the civil rights movement, okay? And also in 1963, you had the church bombing. That was a very famous church bombing where 4 girls were killed in that church, and other people were also injured. And that was a racially motivated bombing of that church. And so just kind of imagine as things seem to be moving forward with the civil rights movement, and we seem to be making some kind of strides in movement. There are still acts being done of racism. And so I want us to kind of be able to paint that picture. In 1964, Johnson enacts another civil rights act, which prevents employment discrimination, okay? And so from 64, there was already laws in place to prevent discrimination from employers discriminating against people based on race for getting a job or not getting a job, okay? And so that's important, and yes, I know there's going to be many cases from that time forward where people did discriminate based off of race and didn't give someone a job, but I want us to know that on a national level, a Civil Rights Act was already enacted from 64, okay? That's important to know. In 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated, and it was, again, as far as we know, a racially motivated assassination. We don't know a whole lot about the man, and actually I read, I don't know if you can, we have to look into these things, but anyway, I looked into the guy, and he maintained up until his death that he didn't do it. And that's really interesting to know. And actually, Martin Luther King Jr.'s, I want to say his daughter or his son, they met with him before the guy passed, and he said to his son or daughter's face, like, I didn't murder your dad. And then the son or the daughter said, I believe you. And so it's just something interesting to know. We may never know at this point. All right, so that's setting the stage a little bit in terms of the history of slavery, the history of segregation. Now I want us to move into what has happened in the black community, okay? And I want to look at violence in the black community. This is a really big topic. It's controversial. People don't want to talk about it, but we have to talk about it. It's a terrible thing. It is too big not to talk about. Like, for me, I think it's so wrong not to talk about it. We have to talk about this, okay? So violence in the black community. In 1965, Johnson starts his war on crime, all right? And so from that point, you could actually look, there's a chart. I have some sources if anybody wants this presentation later. I have all my sources. But one of the charts shows that from Johnson's war on crime, the homicide rate just skyrockets from that point. So whatever was going on with that war on crime, it was not very effective. It did the opposite of what it was supposed to do. And the war on crime propels the homicide rate extremely high. Black communities were, at that time in the 1960s, ravaged by a heroin epidemic. And what that means is a lot of people were starting to get into heroin. And what heroin did to the black community is it tripled crime in the black community. Not only that, so it tripled crime, and it makes people more violent. You're more prone to crime and violence when you're on that stuff. Okay, this is a substance that alters your chemistry. Okay, from the 1980s to 2008, these are some statistics, and these are unbiased statistics. There's no reason for these statistics to be presented the way that they are. Like, this is an unbiased source here, okay? So blacks were disproportionately represented as both homicide victims and offenders. The victimization rate for blacks was 27.8 per 100,000. That was 6 times higher than the rate for whites, which was 4.5 per 100,000. The offending rate for blacks, so the ones who are committing the homicides, it was 34.4 per 100,000, which was 8 times higher than the rate of white people, which is 4.5 per 100,000. And that has, by and large, maintained over the last few decades. It's just been like that. At a certain point, when Clinton does his crime reform, or I don't remember what it was called, he does his crime reform, and then you see a plummet, but still the ratios are exactly the same. So when it comes to, 6 times higher for black victims and 8 times higher for black murderers, I'll call them, okay? Then you have blacks accounting for slightly more than 51% of all gun homicide victims. Think about that for a second, okay? Black people accounting for slightly more than 51% of all gun homicide victims, okay? Something to know, the black community account for about 15% of the total population here in America. And so for them to account for 51% of all homicide, gun homicide victims, that's staggering. That's really, really high, okay? And roughly 70% of all homicides out of the black homicides were gang or drug related. That's a huge problem. 70% out of all those homicides, it wasn't just someone killing someone because they were angry at them, or killing someone because of, I don't know, who knows what. 70% of the murders that black people are doing are gang related or drug related. And so you have a high number of black people in gangs and doing something with drugs. Right? This is just the reality, and it's a tough reality. But we have to be able to look at that and say something about it. And what's being said out there, like in the media, and when it comes, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement. They don't want to talk about that. Like for them, the narrative is police brutality, white people killing black people. That's the worst thing. No, by far the numbers show this is the bigger problem. Okay. So violence in the black community, here's that chart actually that I was talking about. This is from Cooper and Smith. You have, it was roughly like upper 30s in the 1980s, and then it kind of peaks, almost hitting 40 in the 1990s, early 90s. And then after Clinton's reform thing, I don't know much about that thing, but I just know that was the correlation. It drops everybody down, but really mostly just the black community, their homicide victimization rate down to around the upper 20s or lower 20s. Okay? All right, here's another thing that we have to talk about that's rampant in the black community. It's unique to the black community. It's a big problem in the black community. All right, so this is the breakdown of the family. From 1973 to 2016, 72.3% of the births were out of wedlock. Okay, and what does that mean? It just means they were not a married couple who had this baby, and most of those wedlock births, those went on to be like single parent homes. Okay, a 1992 study shows that black families are twice as likely to be a single parent home compared to all other races. So twice as likely in the black community to have a single parent home than every other race. Another study that I researched and I came across seemed to say, and it was fairly conclusive, that a father's lack of presence has resulted in several negative effects on children, ranging from education performance to teen pregnancy. Okay, and education is going to be something I mentioned in just a little bit here. But that's a huge problem in the black community too, just lack of education. A lot of children dropping out of high school. Highest number, Hispanics and black people, highest number in the nation of high school dropouts. And there is a correlation there with fathers not being in the home, babies being born out of wedlock. Like this is all connected. We can't say, well, somehow, I don't know, like these are not the reason. These are just what's the word? I don't know. You have different statistics that have there's no connection there. What is that? How do we call that? Yeah, correlation. There's no correlation. Causation. You guys know what I'm talking about, okay? All right, so another statistic to know about, and we as Christians, we have to be particularly concerned with this, okay? We are a people who believe life happens at conception, which means a baby in the womb is a real human being. 36% of all abortions are of black babies. Okay, and that could be a little bit lower. I'm willing to say it might be down to 28%. But again, if 15% of the total population in America is the black community, and they account for anywhere from 28% to 36% of all abortions, that's staggering. That's a huge problem. What is going on in the black community for abortion rates to be that high? Yeah, I think I did the math. That accounts for it, because we have to put a real number on that. That's about 300,000 babies that were aborted in 2017 in the black community. Think about that for a second, okay? 300,000 babies, not just we can't just think of that as a number, abortion number. Like, that's babies, human beings. 300,000 human beings were murdered in 2017 in the Black community, okay? Another thing we have to talk about, I mentioned already, is the education of Black people. Here's a quote I came across. In later years, as the minimum wage was repeatedly raised to keep up with inflation, Black teenage unemployment from 1971 through 1994 was never less than 3 times what it was in 1948 and ranged as high as more than 5 times the 1948 level. Okay? And the significance of that quote is that because of, there's going to be a lot of debate about that, but I don't really want to get into that. But there's a correlation between the minimum wage, there being a minimum wage, and high school dropouts. Okay, and in the Black community, when there was a minimum wage enacted, that you saw many young Black men, especially, drop out of high school. Why? Because they could just get a job, right? And so, a lot of Black students are dropping out of high school. This is I can't remember what year this is, but it's not too long ago. This is the Asian, White, Black, and Latino high school completion rate. And so you have Asians at around 50.1%. Those are foreign-born Asians, so coming here, immigrating here, and they will 1 out of 2, which is really interesting. I feel like that's seems way too low, but I guess because we live here. And then you go down the line, whites are at around, we'll say like in the 30s, and then we go down to Black people, they're in like the high teens, okay? So there's a high teens percentage of Black people graduating from high school. And that's important for us to talk about, because is there a correlation between education level and how much money you can make? Yeah, it's pretty clear to say, like, whatever education level you have, there's going to be a pretty clear correlation between how much money you're going to make. The reason I bring that up is because there's statistics being put out there about disparities between wealth of Black people and white people. Of course, there's going to be a disparity. There's a lot of things contributing to that disparity, and education is one of those things, okay? All right. I'm going to give you guys about 11 different insights, okay, because I didn't have time to, each of these insights should have been its own presentation, really, but I didn't have time to do that, so I'm going to give you 11 different insights from all the research I've done, trying to distill this for you guys, okay? Insight number 1, personal racism still exists across America and likely disproportionately affects Black people. Personal racism is serious, it's dangerous, it's hurtful. Personal racism will exist for as long as sin does. Personal racism is just my way of saying, like, you had a racist encounter with somebody. That does exist, 100%. There's no question about it, and I don't know that anybody should question that. It's very obvious. Personal racism exists. I shared with you guys sometime last year, I had a story of personal racism here in the Bay Area, and I shared it with you guys. It happened to be a gay Black man that was very racist towards me. That was like probably my worst racist encounter here in the Bay Area. I've had much worse back home in Canada, but that was my worst one. So personal racism, of course, it exists, and I would say likely, yeah, Black people disproportionately have more personal racism encounters, okay, and probably some of the worst ones. But again, it's not really something we can really quantify. It's just something we have to, like, we hear a lot of stories, and just kind of putting the stories together, we can say likely so. Insight number 2, systemic or institutionalized racism likely exists. Okay, likely, I put in italicized that, but there are no current clear examples. And that's important. And I would say also that I think systemic racism to some degree is always going to exist, because it's kind of hard to define at times, like it is right now. People are saying, well, it exists here, it exists there. Then we start to dig into it. We look at the data, we look at the statistics, and those don't really seem to paint a picture of systemic racism. There's a lot of different examples that people are trying to use, and personally for me, I don't see it. And I know quite a few, well, I don't know them personally, but I've listened to quite a few very intelligent people who are much more intelligent than I, who also say they don't see it. Insight number 3, the protests are largely a response and lament over real personal racism, while the movement is against unclear systemic racism. Okay, that's to put that in different words. People are writing and they're upset and they're lamenting over very real personal racism encounters that they've had in this country. That's real. I don't doubt that they've gone through that, and I wouldn't say that that's nothing. It's a terrible thing. Racism is a terrible evil. Okay, and so that's what I feel like a lot of people in these protests, they're protesting against personal racism, but kind of under the guise and the veil or the, like, as though they're fighting against systemic racism. But when it comes to like them being able to clearly articulate, this is the systemic racism that I'm seeing, you don't really see that. And then the examples that they do give, like I said, you start to pick it apart, and actually you find that it's not systemic racism. It might just be evidence of personal racism, cultures of racism, like things like that. But that's not systemic. That's not institutionalized. There's nothing to fight against in terms of a system there. That's just fighting against people's hearts. That's fighting against people's evil, okay, personal evil, right? And that's a different thing. Insight number 4, systemic police racism is largely a myth with very little data to support it. That's going to be a difficult one. That's going to be a controversial one. I have to throw that out there, though, because the data, again, you have to look at the data. What does the data say? The data says systemic police racism doesn't exist. Are there cases of racist cops killing black people? Probably yes. And I could think of a couple, okay? But is it a systemic problem? I would say no, it's not. The data says it's not. Insight number 5, many police departments likely do need some kind of budget and training reform, but it's not that simple. Like, this is kind of the thing that's been blowing my mind with all these people who are like, we want to reform and we want to, or abolish or defund. Half of the people that are talking about, more than half, like majority of the people who are talking about this, they don't know anything, like when it comes to like, what do police really do? What really goes on in a police department? What does it cost to run a police department? What role do police really play? Like when I was watching the videos of Chaz and Chop, they were trying to have their own kind of police force in Chaz and Chop over in Seattle. And I was just watching that. I was like, man, that's a little sample size of what it would look like if we really abolished police. And it's terrible. Like, they basically were starting to become police themselves. They were arming themselves. They were being unfair to the people. Like, you couldn't get in or go where you wanted to go. Like, they were being worse than some police that I've seen, okay? And it was really, really ironic, okay? Anyway, so do some police departments need to change? Probably so. But is it a widespread national problem? I'd say no, it's not. Insight number 6, alternatives to our current form of and system of policing are idealistic at best and dangerous at worst. So just like what I said, people have this really idealistic view of like, well, we're going to do it like this. For certain cases, you're going to call like a counselor and they're going to come help you. In other cases, you're going to call this person, they're going to come help you. Like, the amount of logistics to get that kind of system to work, people have no clue. And like, yeah, it sounds wonderful, okay? It sounds amazing. Wow, you would have a counselor come for that and no guns involved, and that sounds really nice, okay? But logistically speaking, people don't know the half of like how that is even going to work, right? And I would say at worst, a lot of these alternatives that are being proposed are dangerous, okay? Number 7, white guilt and white privilege are Marxist concepts that are unbiblical and should be rejected by Christians. These are a form of racism against white people. I mentioned that maybe a few weeks back, that we've so flipped, it kind of swung the pendulum so far that now what I'm seeing is racism against white people. And not as though they're really oppressed or anything, but I am seeing a lot of people wanting harm to come to white people and wanting white people to suffer what they did or suffer in kind. That is not at all what should be advocated for. It definitely cannot be anything Christians attach themselves to. Okay, these are concepts that do come from Marxism. If you guys know anything about that, you could look it up. This is not some kind of conspiracy thing here, okay? It's very clear if you study Marxism, how these things are connected and where they're coming from. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. Number 8, we need to stop and carefully evaluate every case of police brutality, murder, and racism. That's a big problem I see in our country right now. When it came to the Rayshard Brooks case, when it comes to every case, I really try to stop and look. I look at all the evidence. I try to watch the video. I read the quotes. I try to look at everything I can before I start to say anything about it, okay? With Rayshard Brooks, that one's a really difficult one. And a lot of people would like to say it's so black and white that was racist cops killing another black man. Stop and watch that one. That one is not the one that you want to say that's an example of racism. I just don't see it there. Rayshard Brooks, he fought against those cops, okay? He took a taser from them. He tried to shoot the police officer behind him with the taser. They don't know what he's going to do at that point, okay? He's proven himself to be violent. He's proven himself to be unpredictable. Who knows what he was going to do at that point? There was cars, there's the public, people waiting right there in that drive-through line, okay? And I'm not saying what they did was right to shoot him in the back, okay? I wish there would have been something else they could have done, but I'm saying that's a case like that. We have to stop and look at everything and try to take a step back here before we allow the narrative of racist cop to kind of paint our picture here, okay? Number 9, Christians have been and should always be countercultural. We cannot be pressured into any movement or opinion. I'm seeing a lot of Christians, because they don't want to seem racist, or they want to make sure that they're doing the loving thing. I think a lot of it is motivated by wanting to love people, but it's misguided. And what people are ending up doing is they're following along with a movement or an opinion that we Christians have no business holding to. Okay, and I say that because, what I'm going to share here in number 11, if you attach yourself to something like that, just because you're trying to do the loving thing, you could find yourself doing a very unbiblical, dishonoring of God thing because you wanted to be loving, okay? So we have to be really careful. Number 10, the mainstream media is a poor source of truth and reality. That goes for the whole spectrum, so from Fox to CNN. All right, I'm not going to just say CNN and the left media. It's also Fox. The mainstream media is always biased, and reading an article doesn't count as legitimate research. And so some of you guys, you read one article and you think you know the whole story. Please don't do that, okay? Look for better sources, first of all, than NBC, CNN, ABC, Fox, BBC. Look for better sources, first of all. But if you can't find the better sources, read every single article, because every single one will have a little bit of something different to help you put the pieces together, okay? And always look for primary sources. So look at the actual video, uncut, where there's not someone talking over it and cutting it all over the place. Look at the whole thing, okay? All right, number 11. This is a really big one. So Black Lives Matter as an organization is not to be supported by Christians. It's an anti-Christian and arguably, I would say, anti-Black community organization. Why do I say that? First, the 3 founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, okay, so I'm talking about the movement. I'm not talking about the statement. I'm not talking about the sentiment of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, okay? That's a true fact. But I'm talking about the organization. The founders are self-proclaimed, they've admitted it. They've said it very clearly that they're trained Marxists. And at their rallies and protests, those are run by people that they've trained up under them, okay? So what you have is an organization run by Marxist people, right, who are trying to spread Marxist ideas, ideologies, and Marxist policies, and Marxist whatever they can. It all stems from their Marxist training, okay? That is not something to be looked over. That's a huge deal. Read up on Marxism. Read up on what Marx did. This is a terrible thing that led to mass murder, all right? That's the end of Marxism. Black Lives Matter as an organization is anti-traditional family. This is a quote directly from them. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages. I already presented to you why the family is so important, and having fathers in the home is so important, okay? But Black Lives Matter as an organization, they basically say they don't care about that. We're just whatever you want to make your family to be, we're all about that. We'll kind of raise our children as a village. It doesn't work that way. And I would say that's a very harmful ideology. Black Lives Matter is very pro-LGBTQ agenda, okay? I'm not saying pro-LGBTQ people, like they love them. I'm saying pro-agenda. So they're very much, gender is a spectrum, and be who you want to be and do what you want to do, and none of these things from tradition matter, or none of these things from science matter, okay? I would say they have no goal of forgiveness or reconciliation. That's a huge deal to me. Like when I look at a movement that I'm going to attach myself to, I want one that is going to, as best as possible, display Christ-likeness or biblical principles. There is no message at all about forgiving white America and reconciling with white America. It's more like, white America, we need you to bow down to us and do what we want you to do because of everything that you put us through, and that's it. And then maybe centuries later, we could talk about reconciliation, okay? There is no message of forgiveness or reconciliation in Black Lives Matter. Another thing is a promotion of black power. It should be pretty obvious why that's a problem. When you say we want to support, it's not just simply we want black people to be empowered. It's a bit more than that. It's more black people empowered over and against white people, okay? And then finally, they demand reparations, all right? That's a big problem. I would say you could look into that. I'm not going to say much about it. It's a big problem. It would do a huge disservice to the black community if that ever got passed. All right, so here we go. What do we do as Christians? All right, and let me lay out some things that we can do today. The first thing we can do under the protests and advocating category, we could fight against abortion policies and laws. Again, why? Because the black community, they have an insane amount of abortions going on in the black community right now. And so if we want to save and we care about black lives, then we as Christians who believe, again, life happens at conception, that's a human being that's being murdered in the womb when an abortion happens, I'm going to fight against abortion. Because if I can fight against it in any way, shape, or form, if I can, stem, what's the word? If I can hold back the tide of abortion in any way, shape, or form, I'm going to do that because it's going to save black lives as well as many other lives, okay? Education. This one's a little controversial. There's different studies on different sides about this, but I do believe this is a very good thing. We need to promote charter schools. Charter schools have been proven in black communities to lead to very high success rates of high school graduation, very high test scores that are basically. And here's where the controversy comes in, or the disputing. People say, well, charter schools produce the same test results as public schools. That's a really good thing, because when black students are in the public school system, they're performing terribly. And so when they're in the charter school and they're performing at level of the public school, that's a really good thing. But the people who are disputing that, they say this is segregation, we're going back to segregation times by having black charter schools and so on. I think it's overall, I understand the argument. I think it's silly when it's such a good thing for the black people, okay? A vote against, something to vote against once you guys can vote. This is another controversial thing, but I would vote against the welfare state. It has not helped the black community. I believe it's held them back for many, many decades now. Another thing we have to do is to refuse to fall into Marxist or socialist or any other anti-Christian ideologies and call them out as such. You don't have to get crazy with it. I know someone who's a little bit too much with it. Like, they're just always posting about it every single day with like essays. Okay, that's a little too much. They're probably not focusing on the things that we're supposed to be doing as Christians, all right, by doing that. But we should be able to call these things out for what they are, okay? And that's important because not everybody's going to take the time to do the research. Not everyone is going to have their blinders up and have their radar working, okay, and they're going to fall into these things. And so as a loving brother and sister, we do have to help the body of Christ. Another thing we have to do is, I believe we have to support black Americans who are educating their communities on these topics. I can name a good handful of black Americans that I've been listening to that are brilliant, and they don't fall in line with Black Lives Matter movement or a lot of the ideologies that are out there right now. Like someone would be Thomas Sowell, Glenn Lowry, Coleman Hughes, who else? John McWhorter. Those are just some, or Larry Elder. Really good people, very brilliant, good to listen to. On the spiritual side, I want to remind us that we're here for the Great Commission, okay? Boys and girls, we're here for the Great Commission. And so what does that mean? It means I'm here primarily to make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them to obey everything that Jesus has commanded, right? And so that last part especially, I want to make sure that I'm teaching people what the Word of God is. I want to make sure that I'm teaching Christian principles, kingdom ethics, okay? How do we live as a kingdom person? Because that type of living, that type of person is going to have something that these protesters and Marxists will never have. And it sounds good, like what they're fighting for sometimes. It sounds really nice. It's like a utopia. But it's impossible when you're living in a sinful world, okay? Another thing I want to challenge us to do, we have to befriend, listen to, and love people in the Black community. And so some of us here today, you don't have a Black friend, and I'm not saying go out and get one. That's really strange to say, and I hear stuff like that sometimes, like go and make a Black friend or something. Like, okay, going about your life, be friends with people, okay? And if they happen to be Black, that's a great thing. Get to know them, hear their story. They probably will have some very personal stories of racism that they can share with you. And I would say be sympathetic when you hear those things, like hear them out on that. They might, if they kind of go down the road of like, well, I believe in, there's systemic racism and I want to fight against that. You can hear them out on that too, so long as they're not going to force you to believe what they believe when it comes to that, okay? But speak the truth in love. Don't be afraid to say, from my research and the data, this is what I see. What do you think about that? Have that kind of conversation with people who believe that. Finally, seek God's heart and His word on matters of race, racism, discrimination, and unity. That's a big problem that I'm seeing right now in the church. We're not looking to the Word of God. People are just like, what sounds good, and what do I think happened in history? And we're kind of cobbling all this stuff together, and we're coming out with a very unbiblical response to what we're supposed to be doing, okay? And it's also out of fear, again, like I don't want to seem racist. I don't want to be the bigot, right? And I understand that, but in your pursuit not to be a hypocrite, you're becoming unbiblical. And so that's not the way to go. You're dishonoring the Lord for some people here. Not you guys specifically. I'm talking about anybody who would go that way, okay? All right, and so finally, there's some sources here. You're not going to be able to see all that on the page there, but if anybody wants this presentation, I can send it to you, okay? All right, that was a lot. Honestly, I probably could have stretched that out for like weeks. Yeah. Here's a time for a Q&A. I know we went a little overtime. Thanks for staying behind, though. There's still 35 of you guys here. That's pretty amazing. But yeah, any questions that you guys have? Anything I didn't cover, something I did cover that you're wanting more clarification on, I'll do my best on that, okay? So here's a time for questions. I hope that was clear. I covered a lot of ground there, so I'm sorry. It was a lot. But I didn't want to stretch it, more weeks, and I wanted to kind of just put this out. These are the combination of all my thinking and my research that I've been doing for the past kind of a long time, I guess. So anyway, any questions, comments, disagreements, anything at all? Next week we're going to have, I think it's Teacher Son, I can't remember. But we have some good topics coming up too, guys. Really, really good topics coming up every week. Amanda and I are impressed by your slideshow. It's aesthetic. Out of all things to say, right, guys? Thank you. Citations, good job. There was actually more sources I didn't put in there that I could refer you to. Yes, Q&A. If anyone does have any questions. I know there's a lot. You probably feel like I don't even know what to ask you, Pastor Paul, because I feel like I know less than what you know or something. Don't be afraid of that. Just whatever question you might have, just ask it, okay? I'm not going to shoot you down. All right, Amanda says, what's your opinion on the Trump administration and how government should fix the state of the country? Okay, all right, so yeah, without like being able to spew any statistics or any of any sort, just my opinion, as you asked, I would say, so when it comes to the president and when it comes to Trump, I would say as a, let me explain this like this, okay? This is tough, all right? As someone who I am very unashamed in my pro-life position, and I think it is, we can't minimize that. A lot of people right now, they're wanting to minimize that. Like, you can't just make everything about pro-life and make that your biggest thing. And I ask the question, why not? When we're seeing 800-something thousand babies aborted every year, why not? Compared to almost any other kind of cause of death, that's a staggering amount of people, okay? And I'll call them people. So for me, I'm all about, I do want a president in office who is going to be pro-life. Trump has done that, more or less. Not that much, a whole lot has changed. I do believe that when we have a pro-life president in the office, what it does at least is it prevents the tide of abortion from getting worse. There's also the statistic that abortion has just been getting better over the last however many years, and I've looked at that. But still, I want to have someone in office that I know wherever possible, there will be a fight, or there could be a fight for the pro-life cause against abortion, okay? So that is my main thing. Other things, I do think Trump is often ridiculed and, what's the word? He's blasted in the media for things that are very unfair. I don't need a president to be like super eloquent, and like Obama was a very eloquent man. He was very careful with his words, and to a degree, I really I can respect that. I can appreciate that. Trump, the thing that I kind of admire is he doesn't care like so much that like I have to try to watch what I say, and I have to make it sound exactly right every single time. Now, he says a lot of terrible things, and he's hurt people by his words. I get that. But at the same time, what he has also done is he's shown himself to not be as much of a politician as some other presidents. And that is a good thing in the sense that we keep getting people who just want to play the politician game, and Trump doesn't really play that overall. Okay, he's playing his own game, I guess. He plays the Trump game, and the other guys are just kind of playing the same game. And to me, it's kind of a good thing. All right. I don't know if that fully answered your question. As far as the government fixing the state of the country, there's a lot to say about that. I would say in a lot of places, I think the government needs to pull back their policies and trying to interfere and let states or even counties or cities have more of a say in how they're going to tackle their issues. Teacher Son says, can we say there's a difference between systemic racism versus systemic racial injustice? I think for me, just the way I'm reading that, I would say they're the same thing. Systemic racism, which would refer to a system of racism, versus a system of racial injustice. I think they're the same. And so I would say, no, there's no difference. Kristen asked P. Paul, other than the pro-life, what other laws and topics and policies should be most important? That's a good question. And so I guess I try not to seem like a utilitarianism who just cares about the amount of lives being saved or whatever it is, but I have a hard time not seeing things that way. Like, I want the most lives preserved as possible. Of course, if those lives could also be given like the best conditions possible, that's great. And so other things that I do care about, let's see, I would say, yeah, so next, under like abortion, I would kind of put up there like homicides and violence in this country, the war on crime. I don't know what the solution is for that. I would definitely say not abolishing the police. I would say definitely not defunding the police. There could be some reforms needed, but overall, violent crimes in this country is a huge problem. I would say education is a huge problem in this country too. And so somebody who has something to say on those three things at least, I would be very interested to hear what they have to say. Like if Biden was pro-life, liferate, how would you pick between him and Trump? Well, that's kind of the thing with the system that we have. I don't think you're ever going to have a Democrat that's pro-life. It's just not going to happen. But if somehow it would be possible, I still would probably vote for Trump over Biden just because, well, there's a lot of reasons. Like one kind of very small, it's not that small. I really actually think that Biden is unfit to be a president. This is not conspiracy. I've watched a lot of his speeches. I've been monitoring him. I actually think I think he's health-wise not able to do the job. And Trump's pretty old too. And there's different times where Trump slips up because he's kind of old. Okay, and Biden's going to be 20 times worse when it comes to that. He's going to be slipping up left and right. A lot of times he doesn't even know where he's going in his sentence. Like he'll kind of stop midway in a sentence and forget where he was going, because he's not only is he old, but he had a brain injury some years back, and I really do believe that it changed him. That's one reason, but there's other reasons. There's other policies I just wouldn't jive with. I don't like his involvement with certain things that I think under like the Obama administration went on that were scandalous. But other than that, I don't know a whole lot like about Biden as a politician. Like what else does he stand for? But just like with the system that we have, you can kind of already guess. I already know like what policies he's gonna support, not support, etc. That's the terrible thing about our two-party system, kind of. Anything else? Good questions, guys. I really appreciate that. And I hope that question or that answer was okay for you, teacher son. If not, you can ask another one, or we can offline it. Anything else, guys? Anything you've come across? Some statistic that seems to be against what I shared today. A teacher's son says, can there be a biblical public support as a Christian to the black community on the issue of racism? Have you seen any case that were done in a biblical way? Yeah, I'd say absolutely. There should be a biblical support of the black community, but I on the issue of racism, I would say it really depends. Like the Gospel Coalition did something recently, and I don't agree with some of how they did it, actually. I think they weren't very careful. It kind of did start to fall into the narrative of systemic racism and injustice a little too heavily. What I'm willing to do, or what I would be willing to do is for communities that have had a lot of the personal racism that I'm talking about happen to them, I'd want us as a church to come alongside them. If there is like a discernible community, like all of us here, we've gone through that, and it's affecting us, our day-to-day life, and affects how we view ourselves as a person, our identity, and all these things. Yeah, I want the church to come alongside them and say, hey, we're here with you, we're here for you, we want to protect you, we want to support you however we can. But I just don't see okay, well, what else can we do besides that? Like there is no, because I don't believe there is any discernible systemic racism. I'm not sure where you go from there, if that makes sense. But you said, have you seen any cases that were done in a biblical way? Yeah, I guess that's a really good question. Like I said, just that the Gospel Coalition, not bad. Have just like some criticism for how far they went into the systemic racism narrative. But I would say because it was about lamenting, and if you could kind of dissect that lament away from the systemic racism narrative, then I think, because like I said, I think what a lot of people are experiencing, what they're sharing is, I had experiences of racism, and I've been treated this way, I've been racially profiled, or whatever it is. I've had these experiences. And so when you're talking about personal experiences, we should be sympathetic. We should, do whatever we can to support them, protect them. It's just, I think it's maybe a bit awkward, I guess is the way to put it, to have big public response to this. I think it's more, let me sit down with the person who had that experience and minister to them one-on-one. I don't know what kind of public statement we need to make. I think overall the Christian church in America has been I don't want to call it anti-racism. That's a little tricky, but we haven't been racist and been friendly to racism for a very long time overall. And so I don't know what public statement we would need to make to remedy something that I don't know really exists. Have you heard of Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man? It's YouTube vids with a man named Emmanuel Ako. Yeah, I think I have seen that one, Amanda. And I would say, that his personal view is also more in the Black Lives Matter organization line of thinking and systemic racism, et cetera. And so I do appreciate that, though. Like, that's what I love to see. So I would love to sit down with someone who's like a Black Lives Matter organizer, and they believe in these things. If we could sit down and have a conversation, right now in this country, it's so hard to do that. And so I do appreciate, even if it's someone I disagree with, that they're able to sit down with people, and like, even if it's celebrities and they're probably putting on face and kind of saying what they think they should say, but still, it's better than not talking at all and not having these dialogues. And so that's what I want to see happen more. Like, I'll disagree with your Marxist ideologies. I'll disagree with how far you're going with these things. But can we maybe find some kind of middle ground where we care about the Black community and we want what's best for them, and I have my idea for what's best for them, and you have your idea, and we can kind of maybe agree that seems genuine enough. I don't know. That could be helpful. So yeah, I have seen that, but my impression was that he's more in line with like Black Lives Matter, the movement. John, she's asking, can you talk more about the biblical response to reparations? Wow, Teacher John. Context Christianity Today recently argued for the church to take the first step to make it happen. Okay, my short answer to this, because I haven't spent a lot of time looking into this and coming up with a biblical answer for it. Okay, so what the biggest biblical argument against this is going to be, you don't punish the children for the sins of the father, okay? And we're talking about many generations removed. I tried to display that to you guys. Like, in the North, for over 200 years now, slavery has been abolished. And I'm not saying it was it's just, it was always okay ever since then for people in the North. I'm just saying, I was trying to display to you, throughout the time of segregation, Jim Crow laws, et cetera, there were varying degrees of already racism being broken off of this country. And so for that many generations being removed, and now us here in 2020 paying, giving money to the Black community who are descendants of the slaves and descendants of the people who lived under systemic racism, it doesn't make sense at all to me. I think it's actually not just on that principle. So already there, I don't agree with making the children, we are the children, pay for the sins of the father. On another level, I don't agree with it because we've already seen what the welfare state has done to the Black community. Just, the food stamps, just, I'll call it, what do you call that? Just welfare money, okay? But I forgot what it's called, okay? Welfare money, food stamps, et cetera. A lot of these things, while it has been helpful to some, it's been very detrimental to the overall community. It's kept many Black people, I would say, in poverty. And Black people account for a lot of the poor people in this country. And that happened, you have to kind of trace back and go back in history, how that happened. And I would say you trace it back to where all these social programs started to happen, where people thought they were doing the loving and good thing for the Black community, but it had the complete opposite consequence and result. And that's maintained. It's been maintained like that since then until now. And so for those two reasons, I would say reparations is a very, very, very bad idea, and I would vote against it 100%. I think there's some reparation bill or law or policy or something that's trying to be passed right now in California that's kind of making its way up. And if it ever gets to a point where I could vote on it, I'm going to 100% vote against it. And I won't think twice about it. I won't think that I'm being unloving to Black people by not wanting them to have some kind of financial support. because it's not that. That's not what it is. And mentally, I just feel like it's such a terrible thing for a black person today to receive reparations, like mentally, just to receive that, like what that would do to someone, and like what kind of mentality that would give you. I also think it's a really detrimental thing to the black community. And so, hope that answers your question, Teacher John. Did my best. Okay, anything else, guys? Good questions. Religious freedom is super important too. I agree. Yes, that is another thing that Trump, we can attribute to him. How are you today? Does your eyes hurt from doing all the research? Yeah, so I didn't sleep much last night. I probably slept about 45 minutes because I was up. I was trying to do more work on this throughout all day yesterday, but I just couldn't focus for the life of me. Like I was trying hard to focus. I just couldn't up until it was 11 p.m. or something. And I finally was able to start focusing. So I put a lot of work in at that time. I would say I've had some restless nights because of this topic. I've had headaches and things like that because I'm just thinking about it so much. And I'm ready to take a bit of a break from it. I feel like I'm pretty confident of where I'm at today and how I got here. And I'm ready to take a bit of a break, but I think there's going to be another wave to this. There's going to be another element to this that the church is going to need to respond to and have a response to. And so I want to be ready for that time. But thanks for asking. MIA, SPA, or MBA? What does that mean? I don't know what you're asking there, Kristen. What's your favorite writing format? How long did it take you to make that? It didn't take me that long to make the presentation because these things were just already kind of in my head, ready to go more or less, how I wanted to do it. So it didn't take long. What's your favorite writing format? I don't know what you're asking. Oh, okay, that's what she's asking? Okay, I don't like any of them. They're all bad. But I guess MBA, what's it called? What is it? MLA. That one's okay. The one I hated that I had to do for my seminary master's degree is Turabian. I hate Turabian. Do you guys have to do Turabian? Anybody? It's so bad. It's pretty organized, just so tedious. For people who can do that kind of tedious work, it's really good, but I'm not that person, so it was really, really, really hard every time I had to sit down and do my Turabian stuff. I hated it. That actually caused me to be late for many assignments because I was finished everything, or I had almost everything ready, but I didn't want to do the citations and all that. I know you're supposed to do it as you go, but a lot of times I didn't really do that. Yeah, MLA. Disney Channel, Shutters. Flex the brain muscles. My brain muscles are really, really weak now. Yeah, Turabian I think her name's Kate Turabian, I believe. I don't know, she came up with that system. Kudos to her. Okay. Well, thanks, guys. I want to end things there. If you have any more questions, though, if there was something that you disagreed with, something that you're a little worried about, maybe is Pastor Paul kind of like this now, or if you have any kind of concerns like that, please try to address that with me. If not, address it with a teacher, because maybe you don't want to. It's awkward to address it with me if you really disagreed with me. Talk with a teacher, and they may or may not have more things to add to the discussion, but just having someone to listen to you on your concerns, that's a good thing. Okay. Wow, my friend, Pastor Sung, is here. Okay, guys. Well, let me add things there. I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to send you guys off. You guys can go about your day. Stay out of trouble. Be good, okay? So let me pray for you. Father, I just want to lift up this time. This topic is so tough. It really is, because we know for a fact there's very real racism at work in our country. That's a fact. We know people are hurt by that. And very likely, it's the black community that has had the most kinds of encounters like these and most hurts incurred because of the sin and evil of racism. But at the same time, we know that there is a narrative out there right now, and there's ideologies that are not based in reality, not based in truth. There are things that are being very much skewed because of agendas. And we as Christians, we have to be very, very careful that we don't just follow along with the crowd, because very often the crowd's going to be going the wrong way. So God, help us, Lord, today to remember we are supposed to be countercultural. We are the ones that go through the narrow gate. We are the ones who will be hated because of our belief in you and our belief in your word and your truth. And so God, help us, Lord, to remember that. That's who we are. And we're going to have a lot of these tough conversations where people are they may call us a bigot, a hypocrite, even a racist, when we know, well, I mean, at the base level, everyone is, but we know that we're not trying to be one. We know that we haven't done anything in terms of that or any crimes. And so, Father, help us today, Lord God. We really need your help to navigate these times, Lord God. I pray for your children. They're in this generation where I think many things are only going to get harder for them, more difficult when it comes to this. But I believe, Lord God, that they can also have amazing levels of discernment and wisdom as you supply that to them, as they humble themselves before you, as they cry out to you, O God, as they put your word above all other philosophies and ideologies in this world, because it very much is. Your word is powerful. Your word changes lives. Your gospel is greater than anything man could ever fathom or come up with, O God. We believe that, and we don't apologize for that today because we know the power of your gospel. God, we thank you so much, Lord. Would you be with our black brothers and sisters today, oh God? Help them to navigate these times. Help them in their confusion and in their hurt. And may they arrive at the truth of your word, oh God. We thank you so much. We love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Okay, see you guys later. Peace.